We're looking forward to seeing your presentation. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I hope that you can hear me well, and I hope that technical problems will spare me. I will try to efficiently present to you the offer, because in Poland, the sector related to power, to the nuclear power, is quite well developed, but we still don't have any power plants.
W pierwszym panelu rozmawiali o tym, że oczywiście program jest przygotowywany i szykujemy się na.
In the first panel, there were talks that we already have a program in place, that we are preparing for this, but most companies that have their seats in Poland and operate in this industry are expert companies. So thank you very much for inviting me to present today and for the opportunity for me to present our offer. And our offer seems quite attractive, at least for me, especially in the context of what was already said. So of course, financing is always needed, be it current financing or be it financing for entities that would like to buy something from us, for us Polish entrepreneurs. So in a few words, I'd like to present KUKE to you. We've been around for 30 years. We've been supporting Polish exports for 30 years. But this year, we have an entirely new system for supporting export. This export support system is related to statutory changes. Some of those statutory changes were accelerated by the pandemic. It helped because you needed to react quickly to a changing economic environment and therefore introduce new instruments that could stimulate the Polish economy, of course, stimulate the export aspect, because we as KUKE are an expert in terms of supporting Polish export, but the broadly understood export, which I will try to discuss with you in my brief presentation. So the three main pillars for the new system for supporting export. The first pillar is, of course, supporting Polish entrepreneurs through financing their investments, both domestically, this is something new, and also foreign investments. Once completed and production capacity is increased, the second pillar provides safe financial support and, of course, related to what was already said here within some scope. So the world and the economy has a global reach, and there is no origin for money. So of course, different investments are executed in Poland. As also those executed in Poland, they generate export and GDP for our economy. So the first pillar is related to attracting foreign investors to Poland by offering attractive incentives related to the functioning of their investments in Poland and in the country. And now, who is this system for? This is created for everybody. It doesn't matter what your scale is, what the size of your company is, the scale of your operations, be it whether you have export experience or not. This is, of course, a matter of which instruments from the entire support system will be available to you. Of course, those companies that have experience in export will have much more opportunities to use more instruments, but those who are only starting their journey in export will also have the opportunity to use some of our instruments. So to summarize, we have an offer both for experts as well as those who are only starting with the adventure with experts. So the scale of your operations, as I said, is without a bigger meaning. We also invite smaller companies to use those, also medium-sized companies, large companies. The industry is also irrelevant. Of course, the industry that we are discussing here today is in a very representative group. We are also welcome to use our incentives and to secure financing. We are a provider of security. The banks are providers of funding. We cooperate both with domestic banks as well as foreign banks, so there is no problem here. The companies that, of course, invest into their production capacity and need financing will need more financing in the long term. So long-term funding is also, and securing the funding is also something we are well versed in. We are able to talk about funding with a repayment period of up to 14 years. If you need current financing, we also have the appropriate instruments. And in the next slide, I'm going to show you the new system of insurance guarantees provided by KUKE, which is related to securing investment financing as well as securing current financing and also securing payments for your suppliers. Apart from this, companies that execute contracts, very often in an industry that is highly specialized, will have to present to their employers different contract guarantees. We also provide such instruments, and we are also able to secure repayment of your short-tail liabilities when some of the components you are selling to importers, and those importers expect merchant credit that you will grant. Of course, this is also created for banks in order to increase your capacity with the bank and also to secure any loans that might be granted. There are 4 main benefits. The first of those main benefits is, of course, support of development. Development both in the form of investment by purchasing production lines, concluding new contracts, securing those contracts. It's easier to achieve those instruments if we provide the security, because financial institutions often feel more comfortable because the transaction risk is based on KUKE, and KUKE, as part of its operations that I'm discussing here, has guarantees from the Polish State Treasury, so the risk for these documents is equal to our country's rating. So now it's A-, and the exposure from the point of view of the funding units, the banks and factoring companies, are secured by the Polish State Treasury, where KUKE is a representative as the administrator of this export support system. What does this mean? This, of course, means an increase of your credit capacity, because when risk is based on an entity that is well recognized, that the rating of this entity is the highest in terms of possible A- in Poland. Companies, even some banks, will have a lower rating than A-, and this rating and the guarantee securing your exposure by KUKE means that banks will be more willing to provide funding, and in some solutions, I will show this to you, their willingness is even up to 5 times bigger. This will, of course, be presented in the following slides concerning investment guarantees and funding and current funding guarantees. What is this reflected into? This, of course, improves your results, both for the company as well as the bank that provides the funding. As I mentioned, our instruments have this feature, this characteristic, that they are non-real protection instruments. This means that when bank uses our security, they have 0 risk weight. They don't have to organize a reserve. If they don't have to organize a reserve, they can lend more money either to the same company or to other companies, and this means that they have better financial results, and the entrepreneur can get this financing at a lower cost. So this situation, we're winning on both sides. The bank can get more and they can earn more, but they can lend more at a lower cost, and this lower cost is, of course, something that is interesting for the entrepreneur. And of course, this is reflected into an increase of your competitiveness. You can offer your services and goods at a lower cost to your recipients, because the cost of funding for you is also lower. New solutions in our offer, just very briefly. What is most innovative throughout the entire export support system is a comprehensive set of insurance guarantees. The first are investment guarantees. Those guarantees secure funding domestically. If entrepreneurs increase their production capacity, they need devices, they need production lines. This is, of course, long-term funding, long-term financing. We are able to secure up to 80% of such funding, of 80% of the loan amount granted to the entrepreneur, and this is secured by means of a guarantee, repayment up to 14 years. What we are interested in are 2 things. The first is whether the entrepreneur has some export history. If they do have, we are looking at 3 best years from the last 5 years. If over those 3 best years, the average of your export income revenues was approximately 20% of your total revenues, then they have the status of an exporter and they can use this security. with several banks. We've already signed contracts. The first transactions are now in the pipeline, so banks are ready to offer the instrument. The security, as I mentioned, 80% of the entire loan, of course, capital, interest, commission, this is secured up to 80%. And if the entrepreneur doesn't have this export history, then there's no obstacle to use this security that would be provided to the funding awarded by different institutions when the investment generates for the next 3 years. After it's finished, it generates export revenues exactly at the same level. So 20% of the revenues from this investment will be export revenues over a period of 3 years once the investment is completed. The second type of guarantee is a guarantee of loan repayment and payment guarantees.
Finansowania obrotowego, krótkoterminowego kredyty do 700.
These are short-term loans up to 719 days, so current financing or merchant financing, which is granted to Polish entrepreneurs by suppliers and secured with a guarantee. Also, 80% of the exporters' liabilities, either from current financing or credit granted to other entrepreneurs, granted by other suppliers. This may be secured by means of a guarantee of KUKE. And then the last form of guarantee that we offer, also contract guarantees. So contract guarantees, deposit reimbursement. What is important from the point of view of contract guarantees, we need to have particular export contracts concluded by Polish entrepreneurs with foreign entrepreneurs, and then we are also able to secure up to 80% of the exporters' liabilities. This slide is something that you can find provided by the organizers and stuff. There are companies in our YouTube channel, how very simply these instruments are structured. What I told you, investment guarantee, there is no lower amount of financing. There is a lower amount of fund of threshold amount, 5 million zloty. The max amount is 14 years to repay an exporter status, or is an exporter status is established based on your past revenues. And the rules are the same as previously. So if you do not achieve 20% of your revenues from export, you need to achieve this over 3 years. After the investment is done, how is this reflected into your operation? But this is how it works. Without using an investment guarantee, an entrepreneur would be able, for example, to get 10 million zloty. The entire risk is based on the company that incurs the loan, and 100% of this risk is secured by the bank. So on fixed assets, usually on some personal security, so personal bills and stuff. If you would like to continue using those 10 million, we need this this financing, and the bank uses our security. We provide a securing guarantee for the funding. Then 2 million is the risk with the bank, and 8 million is the risk that is taken over by KUKE. 2 million is the risk covered in connection with the lender, and then 80%, 8 million is the risk carried by KUKE. There is zero weight for this risk. The bank doesn't need to create a reserve, so they can actually lend the 8 million to other companies or to the same company if they would still like to stay with a 10 million risk level. Then the maximum funding level could be up to 50 million, because 10 million would still be the risk of the bank, and then 80% of the 80% of the funding risk would be with KUKE. So this is very simplified view, a summary of what this instrument gives you in terms of your credit capacity with the bank and where the bank bases its risk. And if the bank accepts 10 million and KUKE is approved up to the statutory limits, then we can talk about a much larger scale of the funding. Payment guarantees, as I mentioned on the first slide, where I presented all the 3 types of guarantees we offer, are either connected to current financing or connected to securing merchant credit provided where you need to pay in cash, you get merchant credit from your suppliers, and we provide the guarantees to secure those contracts. Those are short-term instruments, so the maximum repayment period is 719 days. Contract guarantees is the last type of the guarantees that I presented here. We, of course, have all the possibilities related to guarantees up to repayment of the deposit, removing defects, so anything that would be expected by your counterparties, your employers that order your goods and services, this can be covered by such instruments. If the particular counterparty would like those instruments to be issued by a bank, there's no problem with this. You can talk to the bank and we can establish a guarantee for the bank who is going to finance such an instrument, and 80% of the fronting guarantee may be secured with our guarantee. Then the beneficiary of this guarantee is the bank. The bank grants a guarantee to 100% of the liability that your counterparty expects, and then we secure the bank providing the guarantee up to 80% with our guarantee. If you're considering your investments in a more broad perspective, because as I said in the first slide where we had those 3 pillars of the new expert support system, I mentioned there that both funding related to investments domestic and foreign.
Przez nas zabezpieczane. Także gdyby Państwo takie inwestycje planowali bądź już posiadają.
So if you will be considering such investment, or you already have such investment, that we are able to secure it. And first option is to secure investment loans, where you borrow money from the bank for a company, for a division, or to acquire a company abroad, to increase your production capacity, or to get closer to the source in the supply chain and be closer to your recipient who expects our goods or services, or such investment experts. We are also able to secure this with our instruments. So benefits from the point of view of the bank, so the total risk weight is the same. No need to create a reserve here. We do not secure up to 80%, but it's 100%. And apart from this, we can also secure the assets that are located abroad. So the ownership of your assets can also be secured both from political risk as well as acts of God. Of course, political risk in Europe, generally there is none, but acts of God recently have been quite common, and we can see it both in the Canaries in Croatia, what has been happening in Germany with the floods. Those are such events that we secure. We secure up to 90% of the investment spendings incurred with this foreign investment. This slide shows that we are something more than only a provider of securities, because we also are trying to direct supply chains and connect individual companies that work in an individual industry. An example, not from the point of view of nuclear power, but from modernizing hospitals. We have been invited by a bank to participate in a transaction. Standard & Chartered from London asked us whether we would be able to create or invite to a big transaction related to organizing several dozen hospitals in the Ivory Coast, Polish companies who would be subcontractors for the general contractor. We said yes, of course we are able to do something like that. Polish companies will be open and willing to take part, and they will be pioneers or general contractors already present in that market. They say it's possible to extend their production capacity, so we were able to invite Polish companies, and Polish companies are involved in this project. In terms of value, this is almost 47 million euros. Those are Polish sub-supplies related to this organization. So we call this Shop in Poland, because we invite foreign investors to seize the opportunity of working with Polish subcontractors or Polish subcontractors who are providing very good service, who have very good wares. So bringing together companies who would like to order something in Poland. Here in this slide, I'm showing all the instruments that are related to funding. Because entities like KUKE exist throughout the world, we are called export credit agencies, so ECAs, and we have contracts, cooperation contracts signed with the individual European agency, but also global agencies, and we are able to cooperate also within a scope that where we work with big investments, big amounts, and different entities from throughout the world are involved. So when Polish companies are involved in such big investments, we are also able, together with our partners from other countries, to provide security for such structures to big banking consortia. The last thing that I wanted to discuss and highlight here today is, of course, that we are able to secure short-term liabilities. Those are such merchant credits that you grant to your counterparties, and if you're afraid that you might not receive payment, you would like to use our offer. These are merchant credits that can be granted for up to 2 years if you have such transactions where your counterparty expects that they will not have to pay you in cash directly the entire amount, but part of this amount or the entire amount will be paid later. Then we are also able to secure such commercial dealings for you throughout the world. And this is just very briefly the last slide. These are the contact details. If any of you would be interested to discuss our offer more extensively, then please find my contact details in the presentation. The presentation will be available from the host of today's webinar. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, dear Director, for a very comprehensive and concise presentation of a very extensive area that you have presented. I have one quick question from one of our listeners. Namely, does KUKE have any experience in working with Polish companies operating in the area of nuclear projects? If yes, what companies were involved, what companies requested such support? What companies, of course, I can't tell you the names because we are bound by insurance security. We operate in the same regulatory regime as the banks. When banks have particular projects, then they are subject to banking secrecy. We are subject to insurance secrecy. So I can't discuss companies, but we were trying, and unfortunately this didn't come to pass. We were trying to conclude a big transaction with a nuclear power plant to be executed in Turkey. Perhaps one more question, not entirely related to your, so to say, specialization, but you as a finance expert, because one of the problems that it seems the biggest that most believe is that Poland cannot afford to finance a project like a nuclear project. These are multi-billion investments. From your point of view as an expert, can you see any problem? Can you see this as the main problem when executing a nuclear project? This depends on the amounts. We are, of course, talking about RES related to the entire area system that is to be created in the Baltic Sea. These are multi-million instruments, billion instruments, and I think that many instruments will need to be used here. What I indicated here is a big investment, so it's a big cake, and you need to cut many pieces from the cake, and each of those pieces of this cake will be financed in a different manner, will be secured in a different manner. This capital will be obtained partially from some EU grants and will be obtained from instruments offered by KUKE, so where there is capacity on the part of the banks, because of course banks will need to determine their appetite, and we will be able to determine this. If a Polish nuclear power plant were to be built here in Poland, export of the energy would also be happening here, so we will be connected to the European grid. So some of this would not be, if part of this energy would be sent to the European network, then the instrument that I mentioned could also be sent. But I assume that this is a big, complicated project when we're talking about this investment. As I mentioned, we tried to start a big nuclear project. There are financing banks, there are government agencies that provide their insurance. So this cake is big, divided into many pieces, and I think that this would be the shape of the investment in Poland. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you much for the reply. And now we